an empire so vast it stretched from Korea to Hungary, controlling more territory than any civilization before or since. The Mongol Empire commanded the fates of millions, reshaping entire continents through conquest and trade. Yet within just 150 years, this unstoppable force vanished from the pages of history, leaving behind only whispers of its former glory. Most people know about Genghis Khan's rise to power, but few understand the dark secrets behind the empire's spectacular collapse. The real story involves family betrayals that would make Shakespeare weep, military disasters hidden from textbooks, and economic warfare that brought the world's most feared warriors to their knees. The truth about the Mongol Empire's fall has remained buried for centuries, overshadowed by tales of conquest and glory. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's greatest mysteries. The story you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about the Mongols, revealing how internal treachery and external pressure combined to destroy the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. If you're fascinated by untold historical mysteries like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into the hidden stories that shaped our world, bringing you the real facts behind history's greatest enigmas. Now, let's uncover the truth about the Mongol Empire's downfall. The story begins in the early 13th century with a man born as Temujin, who would later become known to the world as Genghis Khan. Born around 1162 into a nomadic tribe on the Mongolian steppes, his early life was marked by poverty, tribal warfare, and personal hardship. His father was poisoned by rival Tatars when Temujin was just 9 years old, leaving the family destitute and vulnerable. Through cunning alliances, brutal warfare, and remarkable leadership skills, Temujin slowly united the fractured Mongol tribes under his banner. In 1206, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, at a great assembly called a Kurultai. This moment marked the beginning of what would become the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Mongol war machine that Genghis Khan created was unlike anything the world had seen before. Built on the foundation of superior horsemanship, revolutionary military tactics, and ruthless discipline, the Mongol army could cover vast distances at incredible speed. Each warrior typically maintained 3 to 4 horses, allowing them to travel up to 100 miles per day. Their composite bows could accurately strike targets at distances of up to 400 meters, giving them a significant advantage over enemies equipped with heavier, slower weapons. What made the Mongol military truly formidable was not just their individual skills, but their organizational structure. Genghis Khan organized his army in decimal units, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors, called tumans. This system allowed for incredible flexibility and coordination during battles. The Mongols also employed sophisticated siege warfare techniques, often incorporating engineers and specialists from conquered territories. The initial expansion under Genghis Khan was swift and devastating. Between 1207 and 1227, the Mongol forces conquered the western Xia kingdom, decimated the Jin dynasty in northern China, and swept westward through Central Asia. They destroyed the Khwarezmid Empire, which controlled much of present-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, in a campaign that lasted from 1219 to 1221. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire already stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Sea of Japan. However, this was just the beginning. Under his successors, the empire would expand even further, eventually encompassing modern-day Mongolia, China, Korea, Central Asia, much of Russia and Eastern Europe, Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of the Middle East. The empire's geographical extent was staggering. At its peak, around 1279, it covered approximately 24 million square kilometers, roughly 16% of the total land area of Earth. To put this in perspective, the Mongol Empire was larger than Africa and nearly as large as North America. It connected the Pacific and Atlantic worlds, creating the first truly global trade network. This vast territory contained an incredible diversity of peoples, cultures, religions, and economic systems. The Mongols ruled over Chinese farmers, Russian princes, Persian merchants, Arab scholars, and European craftsmen. Unlike many conquerors who sought to impose their own culture, The Mongols were remarkably adaptable rulers who often adopted local administrative practices and religious customs. The Mongol governing system was built on pragmatism rather than rigid ideology. They established the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, which facilitated trade and communication across their vast territories. The empire developed an efficient postal system called the yam, which allowed messages and goods to travel from one end of the empire to the other with unprecedented speed and reliability. Religious tolerance was another hallmark of Mongol rule. While many Mongol leaders eventually converted to various religions, including Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity, they generally allowed conquered peoples to maintain their religious practices. This tolerance helped reduce resistance and made administration more manageable across such diverse territories. The Mongols also showed remarkable adaptability in their administrative practices. In China, they adopted Chinese bureaucratic traditions. In Persia, they worked within existing Islamic governmental structures. In Russia, they maintained the existing prince system while extracting tribute. This flexibility allowed them to govern effectively despite the enormous challenges posed by their empire's size and diversity. Trade flourished under Mongol rule like never before. The Silk Road reached its golden age during the Mongol period, with merchants able to travel safely from Europe to Asia under Mongol protection. The empire's unified currency system and standardized weights and measures facilitated commerce across vast distances. However, the very factors that made the Mongol Empire so successful also contained the seeds of its eventual destruction. The empire's vast size made communication and control increasingly difficult. The cultural diversity that the Mongols initially managed so skillfully would eventually become a source of fragmentation. Most critically, the Mongol tradition of dividing the empire among the Khan's sons would prove to be a fatal weakness. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 marked the beginning of the empire's long struggle with succession issues that would ultimately tear it apart. Unlike established monarchies with clear rules of inheritance, the Mongol Empire followed traditional steppe customs that divided territory among the ruler's sons, creating multiple power centers and inevitable conflicts. Before his death, Genghis Khan had already begun dividing his empire among his 4 sons from his primary wife, Borta. Yochi received the westernmost territories, though he died before his father. Chagatai was given Central Asia. Ogadai inherited the homeland of Mongolia and nominal control over the entire empire. Tolui, the youngest, received the traditional Mongol heartland, according to Mongol custom, which gave the youngest son the family's original territory. The selection of Ogadai as the Great Khan was itself controversial. Although Genghis Khan had chosen him as successor, this decision went against Mongol tradition, which typically favored the eldest son. Yochi had died before Genghis Khan, but many believed his son Batu should have inherited the supreme position. This dispute created immediate tension between different branches of the family. Ogadai's reign from 1229 to 1241 saw continued expansion, including the conquest of the remaining Jin dynasty territories and the successful invasion of Europe. However, even during this period of military success, the seeds of division were growing. The empire was becoming too large for any single ruler to manage effectively, and regional khans were developing their own power bases and interests. The death of Ogadai in 1241 triggered the first major succession crisis. His widow, Toragene Khatun, served as regent for 5 years, while different factions fought over the succession. This period saw the empire's expansion halt completely, as military commanders were recalled to participate in the succession dispute. The planned invasion of Western Europe was abandoned, and military campaigns in the Middle East were suspended. The succession struggle was resolved in 1246 when Guyuk, Ogadai's son, was elected Great Khan. However, Guyuk's reign was brief and troubled. He faced opposition from Batu Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde, and died under suspicious circumstances in 1248, possibly poisoned. Some historians believe he was murdered by agents working for Tolui's family, who saw an opportunity to seize power. Following Guyuk's death, another regent period ensued, this time under Oghul Kaimish, Guyuk's widow. The empire remained paralyzed by succession disputes for 3 more years. During this time, local administrators and military commanders began acting independently, making decisions without consulting the central authority. The unified command structure that had been the empire's greatest strength was breaking down. In 1251, Mongke, Tolui's eldest son, was elected Great Khan through political maneuvering and the support of Batu Khan. This marked the transfer of supreme power from Ogadai's line to Tolui's line, creating lasting resentment among Ogadai's descendants and supporters. The election itself was controversial, as it excluded many legitimate participants and was held under military pressure. Mongke attempted to restore central authority and launched new military campaigns, but the fundamental problems remained. The empire was now divided into four major Khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China and Mongolia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Each was ruled by different branches of Genghis Khan's family, and their interests were increasingly divergent. The situation deteriorated further after Mongke's death in 1259. A massive civil war erupted between his brothers Kublai and Arik Boka, both of whom claimed the title of Great Khan. This conflict, lasting from 1260 to 1264, effectively split the empire permanently. Kublai eventually won, but his authority was never fully recognized by the other Khanates. The Toluid Civil War marked the end of the unified Mongol Empire. While Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty in China and maintained the title of Great Khan, the other Khanates operated as independent entities. The Ilkhanate in Persia pursued its own foreign policy, often conflicting with the interests of other Mongol territories. The Golden Horde in Russia developed its own diplomatic relationships with European powers. The Chagatai Khanate fragmented further into smaller competing groups. These succession disputes had devastating effects on the empire's military effectiveness. Resources that should have been used for expansion or defense were diverted to internal conflicts. Military units were split between competing claimants, reducing their effectiveness. The Mongol tradition of swift decision-making and unified command was replaced by lengthy political negotiations and divided loyalties. The empire's administrative system also suffered severely. The efficient communication networks that had connected distant territories began to break down as different khanates pursued separate policies. Trade routes that had been protected by unified Mongol authority became dangerous as different Mongol factions fought each other. The Pax Mongolica that had facilitated unprecedented cultural and economic exchange was replaced by internal warfare and political instability. Religious and cultural factors also contributed to the growing divisions. As different parts of the empire adopted local religions and customs, the shared Mongol identity that had held the empire together began to weaken. The Ilkhanate became increasingly Islamic. The Golden Horde also converted to Islam, while the Yuan dynasty adopted Chinese governmental practices and eventually Buddhism. These religious conversions created new loyalties that often conflicted with Mongol unity. The succession battles revealed fundamental weaknesses in the Mongol political system. The empire had been built for conquest and expansion, but it lacked stable institutions for peaceful governance and succession. The traditional Mongol emphasis on personal loyalty to individual leaders worked well in small tribal settings, but proved disastrous when applied to governing vast, diverse territories. While internal divisions weakened the Mongol Empire from within, external pressures mounted as conquered peoples adapted to Mongol tactics and new enemies emerged to challenge Mongol dominance. The empire that had once seemed invincible began to face military defeats and territorial losses that accelerated its decline. The growing resistance of conquered populations represented one of the most significant external challenges facing the Mongols. Initially, the speed and brutality of Mongol conquest had paralyzed resistance movements. However, as the empire matured and local populations adapted to Mongol rule, organized resistance began to emerge across different territories. In China, the Song dynasty proved to be one of the most resilient opponents the Mongols ever faced. Unlike the Jin dynasty in northern China, which had fallen relatively quickly, the southern Song dynasty mounted a sophisticated defense that took the Mongols decades to overcome. The Song military developed new technologies and tactics specifically designed to counter Mongol advantages, including improved fortress designs, naval warfare capabilities, and gunpowder weapons. The siege of Xiangyang, which lasted from 1268 to 1273, exemplified the changing nature of warfare against the Mongols. The Song defenders used advanced military engineering, including sophisticated water defenses and coordinated artillery, to hold out for 5 years against Mongol forces. The Mongols ultimately succeeded only by recruiting Muslim engineers from Central Asia who brought new siege technologies. But the campaign demonstrated that Mongol military superiority was no longer absolute. In the Middle East, the Mamluk Sultanate emerged as the most formidable opponent of Mongol expansion. The Mamluks were a military caste of slave soldiers who had seized power in Egypt and Syria in 1250. Unlike other medieval armies, the Mamluks were professional warriors who trained continuously and adapted quickly to new military challenges. The Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 marked a crucial turning point in Mongol fortunes. The Mamluk army, led by Qutuz and his general Baybars, decisively defeated a Mongol force under Kitbuka in the Jezreel Valley. This was the first major defeat of a Mongol army at the height of the empire's power, and it had enormous psychological impact throughout the Islamic world. The Mamluks succeeded against the Mongols by combining superior knowledge of local terrain with innovative military tactics. They used the desert environment to their advantage, forcing Mongol cavalry to fight in unfavorable conditions. The Mamluk heavy cavalry proved capable of matching Mongol horsemen in direct combat, while their archers provided effective counter-battery fire against Mongol composite bows. Following their victory at Ain Jalut, the Mamluks launched a systematic campaign to drive the Mongols from Syria and Palestine. They captured Antioch in 1268 and gradually conquered most of the Crusader states, effectively ending nearly 2 centuries of European presence in the Levant. More importantly, for the Mongol Empire, the Mamluks established themselves as the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean, blocking further Mongol expansion westward. The emergence of the Ottoman Empire in Anatolia presented another significant challenge to Mongol power. Although the Ottomans initially developed under the nominal authority of the declining Seljuk Sultanate, they quickly established themselves as an independent force. The Ottomans combined traditional Turkish military skills with innovative administrative practices and Islamic religious legitimacy. The Ottoman military system proved particularly effective against Mongol-style warfare. Their Janissary Corps, an elite infantry force recruited through the Devshirme system, provided disciplined firepower that could hold against cavalry charges. The Ottomans also developed effective siege warfare capabilities and naval power, allowing them to project force beyond traditional land-based operations. In Eastern Europe, the kingdoms of Poland, Hungary, and others began to adapt their military systems to counter Mongol tactics. After suffering devastating defeats in the 1240s, European military leaders studied Mongol methods and developed countermeasures. They improved their fortifications, developed better heavy cavalry tactics, and learned to coordinate infantry and cavalry more effectively. The Battle of Mohi in 1241 had demonstrated European vulnerability to Mongol tactics, but subsequent conflicts showed increasing European effectiveness. The Mongols found that their traditional advantages in mobility and archery were less decisive against enemies who had learned to counter them. European knights began using longer lances, better armor, and coordinated charges that could break Mongol formations. Naval warfare presented particular challenges for the Mongols, who were primarily land-based nomadic warriors. Their attempted invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 ended in disaster, partly due to their inexperience with maritime operations. The Mongol fleets were destroyed by typhoons that the Japanese called kamikaze, or divine wind, but even before the storm struck, the Mongol forces had struggled with amphibious warfare. The Japanese defenders had also adapted their tactics specifically to counter Mongol methods. They abandoned individual combat in favor of coordinated group attacks, used terrain advantages to negate Mongol mobility, and developed new weapons and armor designed to counter Mongol arrows and sabers. The failure of the Japanese invasions demonstrated that Mongol military superiority was not universal. Economic warfare also began to take its toll on the Mongol Empire. As different Khanates pursued independent policies, trade routes became fragmented and less profitable. European merchants began developing alternative routes to Asian markets, including maritime passages that bypassed Mongol territories entirely. The economic benefits that had helped fund Mongol expansion began to diminish. The Black Death, which swept across Mongol territories in the mid-14th century, represented another external pressure that the empire could not effectively counter. The pandemic followed trade routes that the Mongols had established and protected, ironically using the empire's greatest achievement against itself. The demographic catastrophe weakened Mongol populations and disrupted the economic systems that supported their rule. Climate change during the 14th century also contributed to Mongol decline. The medieval warm period, which had facilitated Mongol expansion by providing favorable conditions for pastoralism, began to end. Colder temperatures and changing precipitation patterns made traditional Mongol lifestyle more difficult and reduced the carrying capacity of grazing lands that supported their horse herds. These external pressures were particularly devastating because they coincided with the internal divisions that were already weakening the empire. When the unified Mongol Empire might have been able to adapt to new challenges and maintain its dominance, the fragmented Khanates lacked the resources and coordination necessary to respond effectively. The combination of military defeats, economic pressures, demographic disasters, and environmental changes created a cascade of problems that the divided Mongol Empire could not address. Each setback reduced the empire's ability to deal with subsequent challenges, creating a downward spiral that ultimately led to the complete collapse of Mongol power. The Mongol Empire's fall was not the result of any single factor, but rather the convergence of multiple pressures that overwhelmed even the most successful military and administrative system of its time. The internal succession disputes had already weakened the empire's unity and effectiveness when external challenges began to mount. The combination proved fatal to the greatest land empire in human history. The lessons of the Mongol Empire's decline remain relevant today. No matter how powerful or successful an organization becomes, it remains vulnerable to internal division and external pressure. The Mongols created an empire that seemed invincible, but their own traditions and the changing world around them ultimately brought about their downfall. The story of the Mongol Empire's fall reveals the complex interplay between internal politics, external threats, and historical change that shapes the fate of all human institutions. Understanding these dynamics helps us appreciate both the remarkable achievements of the Mongols and the inevitable forces that brought their empire to an end. This incredible story of rise and fall shows us that even history's greatest powers are not immune to the forces of change and division. If you found this deep dive into the Mongol Empire's hidden downfall as fascinating as we did, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from history. We bring you the real facts behind civilization's greatest mysteries, revealing the truth that textbooks often leave out. What other historical mysteries would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest discoveries from the past.